welcome back to Manufacturing Hub on this Wednesday afternoon. My body is now 6 time zones ahead of where it was like 24 hours ago. So I'm drinking coffee, and it's going to be a fun show. If you guys have been here before, welcome. If you're here for the first time, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you guys are new to Manufacturing Hub and found us because Tim is our guest today, or because Talon is our sponsor, or because you're really interested in ERP, Vlad and I run Manufacturing Hub every Wednesday at 4 o'clock East Coast time. We get to have super fun conversations. Every month we pick a theme. This theme is all about ERP, and go ahead and dive into that topic. If you guys missed Elvis last week, go ahead and check out Manufacturing Hub episode 199. That's on YouTube. It will be in your podcast earbuds by the time this comes out. We do want to thank Talon again for sponsoring this theme and actually also introducing us to Tim. We're super excited to go ahead and have Tim here. One last note for any of our potential new guests. We are a live show. We love to go have fun and be able to go ask and answer questions in the chat. So if you're in the chat, say hi, let us know where you're at, let us know what ERP you're using. If you guys have questions for Tim or Vlad or myself, we will go through the process of doing our very best to answer those during the conversation. If we can't get to that during the conversation, we will absolutely go through the process of making sure it is answered after this. But without further ado, everyone officially welcome to Manufacturing Hub. My name is Dave. My co-host up there is Vlad. This is episode 201, talking all about navigating ERP transformations. And we would like to welcome our guest today, Tim Brown. Tim, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm a little bit new here too, so we'll go ad hoc a little bit today.
Perfect. Thank you so much for taking the time, Tim, and joining us today. Before we get into the conversation around ERP systems, could you give us a little bit of your background, your career, how did you get started, and ultimately what you are doing today?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, we talked a little bit about that. Well, as you can see, I'm not a rookie. I've been around for over 40 years since first got out of university. Background predominantly in the manufacturing space. I would say the first 10 years, however, was really spent in the EPC space. So I came out of school, went to Procter & Gamble, got into manufacturing, learned a little bit about what it was like to be humbled as an engineer coming out of school, and then moved my career along the line until I started getting into the construction space, which was really focused on building industrial complexes. So kind of working through that, moving through the project management group, got a graduate degree in project management, and then really thought I was going to stay in the construction area for a lot of years. And a few of you might not remember, and a few of us might remember, there was this thing called the Y2K a long time ago in 1998, and we were a little bit drying up on a capital in the capital construction space in our organization, and they asked me to move over and essentially run a Y2K program that was focused on ERP transformation. So that was really a long time ago, and that was my first dabble, if you will, in ERP, and I was the project manager, project lead for that, and then slid into an IT manager role thereafter, and then continued. So that was really came out of, I would call it operations, construction, engineering, and then sliding into technology thereafter. And really think about it through that management, project management, collaboration, leading teams, and those types of areas. So that would be a bit of my background. I've been in a few different countries. A lot of my time was spent between Canada, United States, and France. So I've got a little bit of experience in global implementations and operations. Spent time in both Canada and United States from a living perspective. I currently live in the US today, down in the southeast part of the country. So we can talk a little bit, maybe sometime along today, about the cultural differences and what I see, and even from a business stream perspective, there's different ways to think, whether you're in the manufacturing space or whether you're in the sales space. There's literally different ways and culturally how they change. And then in the last few years, some of these transformations have included Japan. So that's been in Asia, and that's been, again, a very interesting view on how people think. So that's really, I don't want to get into any much more than that unless you have any other questions, but it's obviously I'm long in the tooth.
I do want to, I guess maybe get a bit more detail on the Y2K situation. I've certainly, read reports and books, but I'm curious what your perspective, like what were, well, I'm very curious, right? Like what the challenges were at that time, and we'll get into the different cycles as well. And look, the cultural differences, of course, is very interesting too. But curious, working a little bit backwards to the present.
Sure, sure. Well, I think you've heard of it. We back before I was around, the technologists like to have two-digit years, and then we had the issue of moving into a four-digit year with the transformation from 99 into 2000. So what did that technically mean? Quite frankly, it wasn't all as complex as people, maybe we made it out. Maybe it was too much of a hype cycle. It certainly, we got through it pretty nicely. Maybe that was due to really good planning and good execution, compelling reasons. Maybe it was because it wasn't quite as catastrophic as it could have been, but let's put it to good planning. I think we all did a nice job back then, so let's pat ourselves on the back. But really, what it was is every single component of a database or a device in the field that was pumping in some sort of date component had to be evaluated and assessed on whether it was compliant or not. So if you were up to date at that particular point in time with potentially your ERPs or your OT or your IT in general, maybe you would have gotten through it. But most of us were still dealing with legacy ERP systems. Some of them were disparate and some of them were very much integrated. We were no different. At the time, the company I worked for was multinational, several ERPs. Back then, a lot of times the ERPs actually sat within the manufacturing sites. So we really had to go through a component of doing an assessment whether the technology would support the business, and we did that earlier on. We did that probably through the 96, 97, because there was a good lead into this. And then we had to put together our project plans and our change management plans to actually make the changes, which means onboarding staff, pulling people out of the organization to help you support the change. And really, back then, we didn't have these systems you could pull off the shelf and configure. You really took an as-is solution and you customized it. As much as we don't like to do that today, that was the reality back then.
And let me ask you maybe a follow-up on that train of thought, right? It obviously is a very heavy lifting to go ahead and replace an ERP system, right? So I'm curious, maybe what do those initial conversations look like when it comes to some of the reasons as to why there's a need to, replace an ERP?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good observation, Vlad. And I kind of put it in my head in two baskets. I put it in the pull side and the push side. Push is whereas IT professionals and leaders have to assess the technical debt of our infrastructure, including the ERP, the application infrastructure, and assess it from an obsolescence standpoint. Pre-cybersecurity hype, that was a hard thing to do. We constantly had to go to, and again, I came from manufacturing, and maybe it will give a little bit of help is what realm did I live in? I lived in lumber, pulp, paper, although paper was extraordinarily lucrative at the time, and chemicals. But bricks and mortar manufacturing companies then, and as they are today, because I still live in there, were pretty frugal in our capital deployment. IT competes against roof on a building or a motor or a press in a press roll. We compete against all of that. So whether it's custodial or strategic, we're always in this, shall we say, constant tension of lobbying for money for certain things. So that would be, I would call it more of a push. I wouldn't call it wet needles per se, but I would certainly say that we're trying to address technical debt and obsolescence, and we're pulling all the levers that we possibly can to get there. In some cases, that's your application, the enterprise application infrastructure, which is your ERP. Then I would say that there's the pull, which is easier for us generally. The pull are changes in the technical environment in which we live. So Y2K was one of those. At the end of the day, that was a pull that forced organizations, your compelling event to force organizations to make a change. That's easier for us. But there's other ones in there. I go back, the internet, e-commerce, AI is going to be another one. These are all technical, compelling events to change. Cybersecurity is another one that I would say will force change. But then there's quite frankly, there's different business drivers. So for me, in the last 7 years, what have I been doing? It's really around mergers and acquisition components. So you have a company or two that merge, or one acquires the other. You sit back, you're putting together your integration plans as an organization to figure how you're going to run your business. And then you need to assess the enterprise architecture that sits underneath that to support those business processes, and determine, is it suitable for my business? And over the last 7 years of what I've been involved in, that was a big driver of that. It was really change in business environments. So one was a merger acquisition, which slid into changes in how we want to project ourselves out to the market as a company. So there could be a change there. Maybe you're a pulp company that wants to be seen as a specialty chemical business. Maybe, and those have different needs and different reporting structures, different financial reporting components that you need to adapt to make yourself viewed as that in the marketplace, so that you can, reach out to the capital markets to fund your business. So that's kind of how I think about it. Really push and pull.
Let me ask you one question on the merger and acquisition side, right? I've certainly studied, multiple cases and the financials as to how those deals are made, through my MBA. But ultimately, I've not, I've not seen a real conversation when it comes to the ERP side, right? So I'm curious, when it comes to, again, those decisions as a company gets acquired, is it more of an operational move? Is it more of a, financial and accounting consolidation? Like, what really drives the, adoption of one ERP between the two companies during those types of transactions? In a general
Uh,
sense, right? I'm assuming it's a case by case basis, but
yeah,
in a
I was
general,
just going to all of
right?
that. What you just said, it's all of that, depending on where you are.
Okay.
Like for instance, you could be in a company where you need to merge your supply chains, or you need to rationalize your supply chains. You might have bought a company that has 5 operations making a certain product, and you already had you had a suite of 5 operations that were already making similar products. You have to figure out what's the best place to move that through your supply chain networks and into your customer base. Very, very difficult to do that in fragmented environments. Number one. Number two, that same team typically likes to operate like they're looking as one organization, especially on the sales side. Very difficult if you're in a fragmented environment. And then depending on where you are in the world, if you have teams that are working in Asia, North America, and Europe, a nice way to bring them together to focus doing things the same way is to put them on the same application. Right? And then when you're integrating with your customers, I would say it's what I've seen, it's simpler for the organization to be able to engage with their customer base, especially if their customers are also multinationals. In our case, that is in our case, where I want to see the same documents, the same the same level of integration into their supply chains as they do from our operations in Europe as our operations in Canada as our operations in the US. So each one has its rationale, if you will. It could be the fact that you just have merged two companies with two aging architectures, and they just need to be that's your compelling moment or your business driver to say, okay, as part of the acquisition, we're going to include the ERP transformation, and that's where that's budgeted within that, and that's where it's planned within it. So, I've been sitting in front of CEOs and boards lobbying, and groveling for money, and I've sat in front of them saying, "Why aren't you moving fast enough?" So, yeah, it really depends on the business environment that you're in at any particular time.
Absolutely. Let me ask you one more question on the M&A side, and then we'll go get into maybe some specific examples and challenges that you've seen on the ERP side as a whole. So how do I say this? From your side, Tim, from the ERP IT side, when do you come into those conversations? Is the question, Tim, before we go buy this company, what would it take to go integrate this ERP into the rest of our systems? Or is it, Tim, we just announced yesterday that we are buying this organization. I need you to go do all of your magic, do all of your integration things, and if it can be done in 6 weeks, that would be amazing. I imagine there's some give and take there, but I would love to know how much of a priority that ERP integration is when it comes to going and looking at these other potential M&A deals.
Both.
Okay.
All. Depends. Just, I'm sorry that there's going to be a lot of wavering and a lot of depends.
Mm-hmm.
I can just go back on my experiences over a bunch of years here. I would say throughout my career, at the beginning, it was more of, hey, we've done something and we need you to go sort it out. Okay. And I would say at the end of my career here, or the tail end of my career, it's been a lot more partnering. Right? And quite frankly, the last 7 years, more consultation, because just I've done it a few times. And, we know that. So that's helpful. I think let's go back to specific cases that might answer your question better. Let's say you're a company that has somewhat of a mature landscape, good or bad, doesn't matter whether it's good or bad, but it's somewhat of a mature landscape. You've acquired a plant or two or three. The company from which you've acquired it from has said, you've got 3 months to get off our stuff. So you typically have a technical services agreement or a transitionary services arrangement as part of your M&A. But that typically comes with a time that you have to move. Those ones are a combination of easy and hard. Hard for the people that are getting it done to them, and easier for people like me who come in and do it to you. So I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but there's 2 ways to do this. We can do it together, or 3 ways. We can do it together, I can do it to you, or we can just not get it done at all and just muck around. So there's the 3 ways. The last one's not so great. Got a few of those examples too, but certainly have had some situations where we've acquired, or the company I work for acquired something, and we had to go in and we only had 3 months. And if you're doing 3 or 4 plants in 3 months, you're literally doing it to them. You're shoving things down their throat. Sometimes it's quite upsetting to the people, and sometimes it's upsetting to the business because you just don't have the time to make sure it's perfect or right. And depending on where you're doing that, it's interesting. I love every country I've worked in. But some countries are more risk adverse than others. Some countries are more resistant to change than others. And it's not because they're good or bad people. It's just that's the culture, and you have to address it. So based upon what I've seen, is when I do something in the States, it's done one way. Canada's very, very close to that.
Mhm.
I would say when you go to Europe, it's a lot more. It's a lot more work to manage through the change. And if you're kind of the head hierarchy when you go to Asia, there's a lot more of questions about what does this mean to them, but a lot more compliance. Yes, let's get it done. There's not too much drama. So it's just, you go back and forth. I think in the last few years, it's really been a holistic transformation, and everybody's built on board. And when it's board
Interesting.
led, right? When it's board
Yeah.
led and CEO driven, my goodness, it's much easier, right? And that's kind of where you got to get to.
Absolutely. Let me ask you a question, Tim, and then we'll let Vlad go ask more about some of these examples. You mentioned these services, right? And you might have a services agreement for 3 or 4 months, and you have to get off the old stuff and onto the new stuff or your solution, depending upon what the application is. But you had mentioned 3 to 4 months. And I know that when most people joke about ERP, they joke that it's, a 5 to 7 or longer year transition. Can you take us through what is done or how you can go about doing one of these in 3 or 4 months, other than the fact of the business, the board says it has to be done, so it has to be done? Are there templates that you go bring in that this works for us in the past, so we're going to force you to standardize on this, and we'll go through the pain on the site level to standardize on what we have on the ERP? Can you maybe walk us through what one of those looks like, please?
Yeah, that's a great observation, Dave. Certainly, if you're a little bit more stable, a little bit more mature, you have your templates, you have the capacity and the capability to do the rollouts. Then, yeah, and I was fortunate. Let's face it, I was in some fortunate spots where I both had the team and the structures and those templates, if you will, to be able to go in and rip and replace very, very quickly. If you don't have that, if you're a bit more disparate, if you're a bit more, and I mean disparate in process, disparate in technology, and just disparate in culture, I could certainly see where you're not going to do that in 3 months. You're just not. So I was, fortunate in that we built a lot of that. So I was in earlier in early days, if you will, because again, I've been around for a little while. So you build that structure, that capability to roll. So that's how you do it quickly. I've had to do it I've been on the opposite side where I had to provide transition services for companies for over a year because they couldn't get out. So it's not 3 months that's not the norm. It's longer than that typically. Some companies are very mature. I've sold off, or I've not me personally, but I've been involved in the divestiture of a property. The other company that's come in has purchased it. They are organized. They're a machine, and boom, they just take it over, and it goes pretty seamlessly. And that can be done 3 months or less. Really can. Depending on how big your acquisition is, though, if you're acquiring a whole company with properties everywhere, well, obviously, maybe you just take what they have, right? So it's every situation is a use case, has to be assessed, and you have to determine what's the best way. You make sure you put your transition services agreement in place, though. Make sure that you're aware of what's going on there as part of that M&A process. What you don't want to be is in an IT organization where somebody from the M&A is letting you know, oh, by the way, we've just sold off something, and you have to look after them or support them, and the vice versa, right? So that's not a situation that's best to be in. You can find yourself there. I have, but it's not the best situation. It's all different.
Tim, if I can ask you maybe to expand a little bit on the roadblocks as to why these, changes take longer than anticipated, right? So I've certainly been in very large companies, so I've not experienced this firsthand. So I'm curious to understand, is it on the technical side? Is it on the people side? Is it culture? Like what exactly, stalls these changes to that extent?
Well, I'll probably get about 82 hits there, and they'll go with typically people, right? If we're all working together, we're all incentivized to get something done by a particular date. We have the systems, the processes, the people, and the resources to get it done. You get it done. You just do. What becomes difficult is when the objectives are unclear, the systems aren't there to make it happen, the people aren't there to help you transition and roll through it. Those are I would say large hurdles to get through. The normal hurdles are, well, we're special, we do it this way here, or we're special and we do it this way there. And I've heard everything from back in the day, you have to print our forms with the address on this side because it's law. That's where the windows of the envelope are, which by the way wasn't the case. But I've seen everything from people purposely getting in front of it to just really wanting to protect the way they do things because they think they do it the right way. And that takes a lot of it's a management of change, right? It's that infamous, you explain the change is coming, you work through it as here's what it's going to mean for you, and here's how we're going to do it, and then there's that resistance phase, and then there's finally the acquiesce phase, and then we move on and make the change. It's just that normal little curve. You can look it up anywhere. Every single person you will talk to goes through that, and they don't go through it once; they go through it multiple times for multiple reasons through multiple disciplines. And if you think every time you get in yourself, if you're asked to change, each little piece of that can be easier, it can be hard, and that's the same way here. You're just dealing with upwards of 10 people to 5,000 people, depending on how big the change is.
If I can ask a follow-up, right? Because I'm obviously trying to learn as to what I don't have an answer as to what I would do in that scenario, but ultimately, ERP systems in their nature are very top-down, right? So based on the scenario you've described,
Yeah.
especially during an M&A, I almost feel like it's necessary for you to force the change onto the people of that secondary organization, right? And it's going to come in and C-suite, then, VPs, directors, managers, whomever will just have to trickle down. This is the new way that we're going to do this process. Is there a better way, right? I'm again like trying to learn from your experience. Is it training the people? Is it explaining the why? Is it trying to reinforce some of those practices before they hit the floor? Like, what does that look like?
Check those boxes right there over and over and over and over and over again. You have to be depending on the change, right? I think the first piece is we all have to understand the change is coming and why. People need to internalize it. Number one, is there a change coming? They may not like it, and they may not have control over it. But I think if you want to move through it, you certainly have to educate them as to what this is doing and why. And you will get certain people buying on, yeah, I get it, that makes perfect sense. And you'll get people that will never buy on it. And that's okay. That's reality of it. But you have to persevere and continue to push through. How I look back on the last few times, we've had some really super successful. Let me go back and just give you some true numbers. This last program, ERP program change, and I mean a program. It was 19 different projects rolled out over 5-6 years. I have the numbers, which were a little sobering. 3,096 business processes touched. Thousands of people. You're touching everybody. The best way to do that, when I look back, so we had a very large plant maintenance change that went I think it went extraordinarily well. Business, the plant maintenance team were part of it. They were explained what we're doing, why we're doing it. It was part of a larger ERP transformation, where plant maintenance was a piece or a component of the ERP that needed to get swapped out, so that they knew it had to happen. There was no option there. But how it was done is on you, right? So if you're going to participate, we all know the manufacturing groups want to participate. They typically have more bodies so that they can free up some people. Bring your best, bring your best. And then what we did is we brought them all together. Took longer. There was more effort, a bit more cost up front. And we literally templated. I would say we were also fortunate to have a very strong maintenance module, suite of procedures that was institutionalized, if you were. In most of our factories, we had to roll them out to some that didn't have that. But we brought everybody together from all of those disciplines. We took the time to template. We didn't necessarily get consensus, but we certainly got consensus that we know this is how we're going to go forward, right? And that included bringing people in from France, from Canada, from United States, and all of the different plants involved at that particular point in time. And we literally, before we left and before we started building too much, of course, we always took some liberties. Here's what we're going to do. And these are the things that are going to be a pain point. Like, I won't get into the ERP that we had, but we went from a CMMS into an ERP. Even for me, that's not fun. So you lose some things there. You gain some things, but you lose some things. So, but everybody understood. Everybody understood that. That one was really successful. Took longer, but that one was really successful because we modularized it. We didn't do a pilot. We did a first rollout. We learned, we tweaked, and then we did another. We learned, we tweaked, and then we continuously improved and we moved forward. That's the nice way. Sometimes you don't get that though, right? Sometimes we just did an acquisition. They need a financial system. You got until 3 months to put them in. So.
Yeah, I can imagine if you go through that design process where, a lot of the groups are involved, obviously you gain the buy-in from those groups, but ultimately, as you mentioned, takes a little bit longer to.
You know what else though you get, Vlad, is you get to run you got to run these things afterwards. You can't just implement and walk. Well, some people can. SIs get to implement and walk away, right? They don't have to live with the mess they created, but we do. So when you have that type of arrangement that I just spoke about, where you have strong involvement from all players, not just, it's not an IT project, it's a business project for the business, and each department has its role to play. And IT is one of those. In the project, I had the PMO group at the same time. But you're building capability of understanding, because ERP is extraordinarily complex. Everything that you do here has some impact down there and potentially could impact what you did up here. I think we all understand that if we're on this podcast here. But business executives don't get that all the time. Some do and some don't, but that's your challenge, is to constantly remind people the complexity of this. It is complex. So what you do is, when there's so much involvement, you build that super user ecosystem, right? You're building capabilities within your organization to sustain the tool, so that you're not having to reach out to IT people in the future. My goal is, plant maintenance guys, you have everything that you need, including your business analysts and your report writers, to do what you need. Our job is to surface the data in a way that's secure and make sure we address any of the technology configurations. We manage the controls, of course. But outside of that, we want to empower those people to manage their tools. It's their tool. So that is the best way. By the way, those have happened kind of fewer than more over the years, and they probably will continue like that. But so that's the panacea. Sometimes the panacea is you just got to get it done. There's no pushback because it just happens. And then there's the times when, it's an effort. We have to explain to people, why are we doing this over and over and over again? You just have to be patient, persevere, push. Some people used to call me I think it was an insult or a compliment. I'm not quite sure. I used to be called the benevolent dictator. I'm not quite sure if that was an insult or not, but you've got to continue to push and push and push. We are going to do this, and I understand it's upsetting to you, and we're going to help, and we're in this together. I think you have to have that back and forth, but we are going to do it. Right? So.
Interesting. Tim, I think that's really good. You had made a comment about how you've been doing this long enough now it's the second time you've gone through that. And I want to dig into some of those questions and examples. But first, we have some people that we need to thank. We want to thank Talon for sponsoring this month's theme and the episodes talking all about ERP platforms, trends, and implementations. Talon helps manufacturers navigate the tricky landscape of ERP adoption, migration, and integration work across SAP, Microsoft Dynamics, Oracle, and other platforms. Talon's mission is to provide active guidance through the entire process, from the initial consultation to post-deployment support. The combination of the right software, the right support, can result in improved productivity, better data access and insights, cost savings through automation, and better overall manufacturing performance. You guys can visit Talon later this month at the American Manufacturing Summit in Chicago on March 19th and 20th, or go to talan.com. If you guys are watching this live, we will go ahead and have those in all of the chats for the American Manufacturing Summit, which is next week live time, which is past you if you're listening to this in podcast form, as well as the Talon website. So you guys can go ahead and check those out. And if you want to learn more, again, we had Elvis on last week. But Tim, back to the conversation we were having. So you had mentioned, as we were getting ready to go through this, this is your second round of some of these ERP selections, some of these ERP decisions that you've made. And so without leading you into one specific direction, perhaps a little too hard, I would love to know kind of your thoughts and your views of, now this is the second time you're going from it, anything from great stories to lessons learned, or other things you think that people should know based upon your experience.
Wow, that was an open-ended question, Dave. Thank you. So I'm trying to think where I wrap my head around that. So you said a few things, and I just I tried to capture them, but let's say selection. The one thing that I am accused of is being a little OCD and process driven. So we do have a process by which we selected software. That's kind of what I would say in our big ERP. This is a decision, by the way. When you choose a big ERP, you're typically making 20+ year decision, or you should be. So you need to put some rigor and structure around that. How I think it was best done in the past is again, it wasn't all me, because I certainly had some help in it. The second time around, it was a little bit more driven from my organization, but the first time, certainly, we had companies like IBM helping us. We had, we'll leave it at that. We had lots of different partners helping us through the process, including a structure called Kempner-Trago for selection. So you essentially build a team that's going to spend a good 6+ months. Mm-hmm. If you're big enough, depending. If you're a small company, it's one thing. If you're a big company, it's another. But we spent a good bit of time putting together a cross-functional team that represented each of our different business streams, because at that time we had 5. Then we brought people in from all of the different functional units, whether that was supply chain, procurement. Supply chain for us includes planning, S&OP, and somewhat of the operations at the time. You have IT to a certain degree. we more facilitate, and you literally build a platform of needs, wants, scoring mechanisms by which your wants are, and then you do your functional assessments. And if you do that right, it takes a whole lot of time and effort. But you will come out with a good solution. Then you literally go through it, you score it, you include your opportunities, your risks, of course, and then you'll type it all in, and then you'll look at 5 of these things, and you'll come out and going, holy smokes, which one is the best fit for us? And you'll figure that out. It will be close. I think the last few times I've done it, it's not as far away as you think it is between one versus the other. It's going to be more about, what your thoughts are as a company and how that culturally fits to you. If you're more dynamic, then maybe Dynamics. If you're more structured, then maybe SAP. If you're somewhere in the middle, something else. Anyways, I'll just, doesn't really matter. We can be somewhat agnostic on that. But put structure in your selection. So there's one. Okay, if that's helpful. I would also say to do that for your SIs. Like most of us are going to need partners or multiple partners. And the culture of the partner has to fit the culture of the company. Some companies like the big guys. They like the Accentures. They like the others because they feel they add some sort of comfort because they're big. So I've done that. And then other companies like to use more boutiques because they find that they're more nimble and they're quicker, often less money. Done that. Some companies will use the smaller companies for the implementation and hire the big guys for kind of oversight. Done that. That actually works pretty nice. So those are the 3 different ways, and then you go through that same selection criteria when you're picking your SI. Make sure that they're a fit to your culture. They really need to be a fit to your culture. I won't get into, what we did is, and what I've had experience with is, I typically fall back to the smaller fellows with the big oversight, with the bigger guys to provide oversight. I find that it provides us a little bit of flexibility, but it doesn't mean what I did is right for somebody else. They have to make that decision themselves. What I would say is try to break it into pieces. You can't eat the elephant. You just can't. So try to break
Absolutely. Tim, let me ask you one follow-up question. So we're talking about selection. When you talk about this selection process, are you talking about the selection process for the enterprise and then all of the facilities, all of the groups, all of the companies you buy in one way, shape, or another kind of fall under that overarching solution? Or would you perhaps go through and do a selection process for different facilities and maybe have different answers, ERP solution-wise?
Great. Good. It depends on how big you are,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're so big, then you'll probably break it up.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not, well, then you'll put it all together. There's more economies of scale when you stick it together.
Absolutely.
But if your business units are so different, if you've got a real estate grid over here, and then you got a manufacturing group over there,
yeah,
right? Pretty different. So again, it comes down to the depends. You gain power through aggregation, right? So if you're making an acquisition of an ERP software, well, the bigger the buy, the more power you have. I don't think I'm telling anybody. Most people are going, "Duh." I get it, right? If you break things into chunks, I don't know. You lose your buying power. You lose your leverage in some cases. You can be a small company and go out to Workday. You're only going to get so much, viewing power, so much time at their table. If you are a company of 10,000 people and you go buy Workday licenses and you stick everything on there, then they're going to listen to you a little bit more. But if you break that all up and I put, these different systems all over the place. Number one, it adds just more technical debt to your life. But so I don't prescribe. It's, if it was me, you have to come in and do an assessment, a discussion, try to figure out what's the cultural fit, what's the business drivers, what's the appetite, what are your people used to today, right? If your people are all in SAP today, flipping them out and putting them in Dynamics may or may not make any sense, and vice versa. And maybe it does. Maybe you're trying to make a total change, right? So that's a very wishy-washy answer to your question, by the way.
I
Let
think
me ask maybe
it's the only possible truthful answer to the question. It was certainly what I expected, Tim. But we'll let Vlad go ahead and ask.
Yeah, and I guess I do have a follow-up that's also fairly open-ended, right? And again, Tim, I'm curious during the selection process, right? And maybe looking back a bit on my experience that was fairly technical on the SI side early career,
Mhm.
a lot of emphasis was on the technical side, right? And as I transitioned into more leadership and business roles, I think that the relationships with those external groups matter a lot more. So I'm curious on the ERP side, when you're making those decisions, are you like, is there really that much of a differentiator between different platforms, or it's really depending on, the relationships and the groups you've worked with in the past, right? I know it's probably it depends as well, but I'm curious like what your thinking is. Is there really again that much of a technical differentiator between the solutions?
Hmm. Um, wow, you'd like to give me some good ones. So yes and no. Right? Yes and no. Um, there's probably people I could say, oh, you can go SAP and it will do this, that, and the other thing, and other people go, oh, I hate SAP, and then you got other people saying the same thing for Dynamics, and you got other people saying it for whatever. So I think here's how let me go back and get more into your first part of your question. I run the IT organizations, and I've done that, but I'm not a technocrat. So to me, it's what are we trying to accomplish as a business? We're here to make money. We're here to make sales. That's our first. That's our first and foremost job. Also, we have some R&D and stuff and all that kind of good things. But at the end of the day, we need to pay people. We need to make products. We need to take orders, make orders, ship orders, get paid for orders, right? Report out to the street, all those kind of good things. There's lots of good tools that will do all of that for you. Some do some things better than others. You can work in a best of breed organization and try to glue everything together. You can work in a fully integrated ERP and you get a lot of benefits for that, but you get some resistance here and there for those types of things. But I don't think that there's not one right answer, right? There's just not one right answer, except that if you bring the right people together from, by the way, all of the leadership. So when we went through the big selection criteria at the larger company I worked for, it was a matter of we brought the vice president of sales in, for instance. Like those are the types of leaders you want at the board. What are your pain points? What are your hot spots? Where do we focus? They don't necessarily get into the gory details of the transactional pieces, not at that level, not during that time. You just don't. Is it a cultural or a business fit for what we want to do? And that's where we focus. Because at the detailed technical level, you typically can make all of them work. We have, right? We have.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to clarify, right? Because again, I've not gone through that transition, so I think it's very interesting how one would approach the selection process, right? Because I think that's the cornerstone of the entire process
It's a
as you
business tool.
right. But for 20 years, it is a pretty significant,
Yeah,
decision. And
I think it's a good point. Your selection process, and there's lots of good companies out there that can help you think that through. There's templates out there. I'm sure ChatGPT will tell you everything that you need to know. But Yes, that was a sarcastic comment. Sorry, but anyway, there are a number of templates that have a good suite of selection criteria for you to go through, including a component of the technical fit. Right? Yes, absolutely. You need to know where things are going. Um, and in fact, that's a few years ago now. So a few years back, we took a look at 3 ERPs. We narrowed it down to 2 at the end, and the one fell out because we just didn't know technically where they were going. I would argue at that time they probably didn't know where they were going, and it didn't seem to me have a runway that looked out far enough. They were jumping all over the place. So they got discounted because of that lack of vision about where they were going. So of course, if you play with the big boys, well, they're going to be around. If you
And
get
just to clarify,
smaller,
that's the solution provider, not the SI, right? So the group that had the
yeah,
software. Okay.
the SIs are um, people make the difference. Depending on where you are in the world, Canada's got an interesting dynamic on SIs. US is different than them, more around tax and how they want to get paid. Europeans are more in line with the US structure, I would say, actually around SIs. So how I see it, you need to interview the people that are going to participate on the projects. We spent all the time doing that. The SI had to be number one. Are you going to allow me to interview your people? Do you fit these commercial constructs? All of that kind of good stuff. If they don't, well, then they're out. But if you start to get these relationships where you feel comfortable with the SI leadership and how they culturally interact with you, that's key. And then the next piece is, who are the people? Because the people you put on these projects from the SI perspective, they're everything. And then you need to make sure that you've got the commercial constructs in there where they can't move them out, right? That's kind of how I set it up. So here's the guys. I thought they worked really well with us, and I've talked to you before. I've been working with one SI now for 15 years because we're that culturally connected. But we interview every single person that comes onto the projects. If we don't like them, we remove them immediately. There's no argument about this. And you don't get to move anybody, and there's no argument about that. And you get to a point where your SI becomes part of your family. They need to be, especially over the long haul, because they're the ones that are going to have the institutional knowledge of what they configured, unless you have this massive house internally. And if you're a manufacturer, you don't have a massive IT house. So that's where I think it's important. Again, everybody's a little bit different, but for me, that's where it was important.
I I was gonna say I think we can probably dig into that conversation, for many hours. But let me ask you one fairly complicated question before I pass it to Dave. Right. So you've mentioned this a little bit: risk mitigation. Right. So inevitably, I think we've all heard stories of an implementation failing for a variety of reasons. Right. We've discussed on the technical side, on the SI side, it could be the partners. It could also be cultural pushback. From the facilities or the businesses, right? Whatever that looks like. So I'm curious, how do you think about, moments where that is a possibility? And maybe what do you have as strategies in place to try and, I guess, salvage the implementation? And maybe in the extreme cases, at what point or how do you think about when do you pull the plug? Are there certain metrics or
Mhm.
measurements where you would make that decision?
Wow, been there. So have I ever pulled the plug? We've all pulled plugs on implementations, right? On a great big one, I that's a lot harder to do because you're throwing millions out the window, right? If you stop, then you just, especially in an ERP environment, if you stop what you're doing, everything gets out of sequence. That turns really, really messy. So I would argue, get in front of that. How do you pay attention to that? Put in processes and systems and pay attention, right? You manage what gets measured, gets managed, and manage it. Step up, participate, roll up your sleeves, get involved. Our job is, as the most senior IT lead, is especially on an ERP transformation. That's your legacy. That's your job, to make sure that these things go well. So pay attention to it and be in there a lot. You don't need to micromanage it, but you certainly do need to be paying attention. But typically, when are you thinking about risks? Day, night, during your sleeping hours, during your waking hours, every single moment of the day? Where are the risks coming from? Every single area that you can possibly imagine. They're coming externally. They're coming externally from multiple vectors. They're coming cybersecurity, economic environments, technical environments. AI, for instance, is even changing the landscape on these things. Internally, it's coming from different people. It's coming from cultures. It's coming technically, just our ability to do what somebody is expecting the tool to do. Did we capture all of those requirements? Do they understand what they told us? Do we understand what they told us? Holy smokes, that it's coming from everywhere. So put in risk management is something that you should be doing every single day. It just is. It's just how you think about it. I can't, Vlad, I can't explain it. It's just part of what I do. It's just, okay, what's that going to do? And don't be thinking 1 2 steps in front of you. I'm a 5Y guy. I love 5Y, by the way.
Yeah.
Right. So think 5Ys out too. What happens? What happens? What happens? What happens? Then it kind of gets nebulous, as we all know, but that's where you kind of got to live. And in my space, unfortunately, it was my tail sitting there a lot of the time. So I knew my numbers. I knew where we were, and I knew my numbers. I really strongly urge people, don't be superficial. You'll get caught.
Absolutely. Let me ask you a bit more, or maybe a bit less of a philosophical question, Tim. So last week when we had Elvis on, he brought up kind of what he called edge solutions coming into ERP, and what he was talking about with that is pulling data from the plant and operations floor. I think he described it, or maybe we described it together, as kind of like a religious debate as to where does your plant information live. And I would love to know. I would love to know your philosophy, because there are either no wrong answers or only wrong answers when it comes to that. And so I would love to know, when you are looking at an ERP implementation, I guess, one, is that even cross your mind? And if so, do you have a path that you have successfully followed in the last X number of ERP solutions?
Yeah. Just excuse me, something just popped up. I got to get rid of there on my screen. Well, I came from the plant, so a little bit unfair for me. So number one, the data belongs to the shareholders. The data belongs to everybody. Right. Mm-hmm. So let's get that. There's nobody, unless you own the entire company. Mm-hmm. You don't own any of that. But you are a very big stakeholder of it, and you are a consumer of that. And there's different consumers of different components. So like plant information systems for me are absolutely key tools to operate your plant with. So I want my data in the plant. And I'm pretty centric about, whether you have a Valmet or a Delta V or, this, that, or the other thing from a DCS perspective, whether you're feeding it to Pi or Prophecy or Parkview or whatever. Those are the types of tools. There's other things out there. I didn't say the SAP word or anything like that. that's where that data lives, because those are the teams that are mining that data and doing the analysis of it. Then they may even have feedback loops into their control systems through it. Do I push that into the ERP? Some. Like if we're trying to understand consumption rates or inventory rates, certainly that comes back in. But in our case, the plant information systems live in the plants for the most part. And we may have some things that sit on top of it so people can have a holistic view. We have management tools that we can drive change management because we're getting them fed up through the data through those plant information systems. So that's kind of how I think of that. DCS devices, DCSs, and all that kind of stuff sit in the plants. They feed the local plant information systems. Most of the work is kind of done in the plant. I'm cool with that. There are some pieces that need to move out. Okay. We just move out the pieces that we need to move out. So that's how I think of that. For us, again, in manufacturing execution, well, now we're starting to slide, right? Whether you're making pulp, whether you're making paper, whether you're making steel, different molecular structures may be in behind, but it's a lot of the same stuff. You're making rolls, you're making objects. Those things kind of straddle for us. So we allow the plants to have some autonomy in a small window for their planning. It's actually really around execution, because some of the products we made are so specialized. Getting to that specialty level is very difficult. We have to have some bailout products in the plan so that we can move that product into them. But we leave a lot of that in the MES system, which typically sits in the plants, but that has a lot more structure around it because it feeds the ERP for us. And then we have planning tools that are embedded within the ERP or attached to the ERP. And for us, ours is a little bit more complicated than some of the other plants. We use we call it PSYOP, but really we use a planning tool to drive your production plans, which then we move those production plans into detailed schedules, and we have different windows where we have that data sitting, but it has to articulate, if you will. So it needs to flow back and forth. That is a joint discussion with the teams and a good understanding. So we allow some operational independence with the MES, but there's also some governance and constraint around the data and how that gets moved back and forth.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that, Tim. Vlad, do you have like a quick question for Tim, or do you have a 27-hour debate in which we're going to go pull out a whiteboard and ask Tim some questions? Because I feel like it can go either way.
I'll try to make it short, right? And I think we've made this slight transition onto the data and MES side, right? So I was curious, Tim, at least in my experience, I believe that data is still underutilized in many manufacturing environments. And I think that there's obviously the technical capability of collecting all data, right, from the production floor. But I'm curious what you have seen on that side, maybe of maybe it could be the ERP integration, maybe it's just the MES, but do you think there's still a lot of value to be gained from leveraging the data better? And if yes,
of course. Of course, right?
And I guess if not, what's the again the barriers? Is it lack of skills? Is it lack of personnel? Is it training? Like, why are people not utilizing
data quality? You forgot the fourth one there.
Quality.
So those three plus data quality. Even with the AI tools, we had model. Like I said, I keep saying it that I've been around a couple of years, and I have. We had multivariate analysis and pulp controllers 20 years ago, just for you AI folks. So, all of these run by tuning, right? It's just the capabilities of the AI tools today are just so far advanced. They can make those permutations, they can build those patterns so much quicker, and without humans tuning, they can self-tune now. So that's totally a game changer. But we're not doing enough of that. And and AI is if we take out the words AI and don't think about the hype and think about the capability of what it does with large language models, machine learning, the ability to run computations, complex computations, billions of times a second. If you think about that capability, we could be, why are we only getting 67% yield there? That makes no sense. I should be 100% if I'm fine tuned. If I do every single thing that, yes, we use an organic substance to begin with, and organic substances by nature have different properties, even if we think they're the same species. But at the end of the day, how close can we get to predicting what that's going to look like? And if we had sensors everywhere, if our sensors were reliable everywhere, and then if we have ways to consume it, we can get better. And that's where we're focused, right? And you work, and some of the big guys, Rockwell, Valmet, all of Emerson, those guys are understanding that, embedding those AI tools within their tool sets. And then how does that feed the ERP? Well, if you can operate with predictability, we can plan with predictability, we can ship with predictability, on time in full becomes better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, we always can improve, let's face it.
Yeah, and it's a tough challenge, right? Again, like from my perspective, it's rarely the tech. It's a lot of the times, motivating the people to find those, like if you want to call them kaizens or root causes, right? Like as to
Yeah,
why you
yeah,
have the issues, and then motivating them to solve the challenges using data. I don't want to say it's frustrating, but it's certainly challenging, right? Like to get the right teams in place, to educate the teams, to make sure
sure,
that they like follow up.
sure it
It's
is,
very tough, very tough.
and at some point, these things are self-learning. The people will get out of the way because the agents will do it for them. That's that's where we're going, man.
Dave?
Absolutely. Talking about where we're going, and Tim, this has been an amazing conversation. I feel like we could talk all day, all night, and they would definitely turn the lights out in your office on you. But before I ask you the final questions we ask everyone, we've had a bunch of folks in the chat. They have not been super chatty. So if you guys have other questions for Vlad, myself, or Tim, you can feel free to either drop them in the chat, and we'll go ahead and get back to them after the conversation, or you can go ahead and shoot us a message, and we will also go ahead and get back to those. Having said that, Tim, I feel like you set my predict the future question up really well. And as all of our longtime listeners know, it's one of my favorite questions to go ahead and have fun with. And you've given us a whole bunch of perspective of the last 30, 40 years in working with ERP and ERP style solutions. But I would love to know where you think ERP is going to go in the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay, well, that gives me some good horizon. Number one, it's not like it's going to replace every single person on the planet in 5 years, right? Maybe in 20, or maybe in 10, I don't know. But I see the big ERP vendors, as much as they say they have embedded AI, they don't. It's certainly not mature, difficult to use. So they're going to get better and better. I think the one thing I would say is how I feel I needed to set this organization up is we do a refresh. We're always current in our ERP. I want to know the embedded tools that are coming out inside of the ERP as they come out. And then we need to be looking forward to see how we can lever those to create robotic process optimizations and all of those types of things. I really see that AI sandwich with embedded AI as being game changers, helping the analyst analyze. That's where helping rid ourselves of manual processes anywhere. And just in general, just kind of tune the organization, but it's going to take some work to get there. You need to number one, you need to have similar processes. Well, the AI pundits would say, no, you don't, because it will learn that too, and maybe it will. So AI is an absolute game changer. The technology is a game changer. Just remember, it is a technology. We've gone through these things before. You've got to figure out what the best use case is for it and pick the best use case. There's not how I've explained it, and even we had this conversation today, is I don't feel I need to get in bed with any AI company per se. I want to keep my powder dry because I think AI is going to be more of a technology that's embedded in all these applications that we'll be able to lever versus ones that we have to connect it to. So, that's, do I see a revelation or a revolution? Maybe. But, I'm not going to go out there and say the world's going to come to an end yet. Right. Not because you only gave me a 3 to 5 year horizon. Like if you
I did only give you a 3 to 5 year horizon.
Yeah,
I don't think we can
around here and all that.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff,
Skynet, I do not believe has started to be built, and I believe it takes more than 3 to 5 years to get there.
But certainly on the ERP, keep yourself as current as you possibly can so that you can lever the embedded AI that's coming in the tools, because those are the ones that I think will be easier to implement versus having to sidecar it and do it all on the side. That's what I think. I have an opinion. Somebody else has another opinion, of course. So.
Well, someone will be proven correct fairly shortly, at least in the ERP or other enterprise software cycle.
And I may be watching it from the sidelines or right in the middle of it. Who knows?
Absolutely. Tim, we like to go ask career advice questions, and I'd actually like to go ask two. So you had mentioned that your master's degree was in project management or program management. So the first question I'd like to ask is, would you suggest someone go look at a master's degree on the management side, on the program project management side, in order to improve themselves? Or would you in 2025 suggest that someone looks at a more technical degree and go take classes or a PMP certification or something else in order to learn some of those skills?
I've done both. So, higher learning makes you think. Experience is where you learn. So there isn't a good answer there. Some people follow the MBA trail. Some people follow they want to be engineers all their life. That's super cool. We need that. Some people want to manage projects. Some people want to manage businesses. Dave, it's totally up to you. I think ultimately is what have you done and what can you do? Right? Never lose the ability to do things. Right? You can have lots of goals and aspirations, but if you can't get it done, then it doesn't matter. So that's how I think about it.
Absolutely. And then if I can go ask you the more broad general question for people early to middle of their career, what is the career advice you would give them? Or perhaps if someone was on your team and says, Tim, I'm looking to grow in my career, what sort of career advice would you give someone on your team?
Don't be afraid to take on something new. If somebody like me comes to you and I think you can do this, what turns somebody like me off is, well, how much does that pay? Okay, well, you're not really interested. So I would say what worked for me. Let's just say what worked for me, and I did okay. So when the opportunities and the chances are given to you or presented to you, don't be afraid to jump in. And when you jump in, give it everything that you have. But it has to be right for you. I built a career, but I also have a family, and there was years where they suffered and I wasn't around because I was out someplace doing something. So you've got to figure out what's right for you. But certainly, if I always look at people and say, hey, we're not quite sure what this really means. I don't even have a job description. Trust me. Trust them. Trust them. Because typically they've seen something in you that will do nothing but help you. And that's what that's kind of my life lesson there for people.
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic bit of advice, life advice there in general. Tim, so we like to go ask our guests for a book recommendation. What do you have for us today?
The one that I finished, I read everything from child's Reacher books to self-help books. So I'll give you the self-help one. Reacher, by the way, is super cool, especially if you like the new ones. But Atomic Habits was the one that I finished last week. Not a tough read at all. Resonated with me because I think systems drive habits, and I think habits drive incremental change. Incremental change aggregates on itself versus trying to do a mass change, right? That's kind of how I think about it. It's really about, they kept saying it, and I was trying to get it to resonate in my head. If you go out there and ask people, besides in IT, what does Tim do personally? They're probably going to say he's a runner. And is that because I run once in a while? No, it's because I run every single day. They all know that I run every single day, whether that's good or bad for you. But, you will, if you think of yourself as a runner, then you'll run. If you think of yourself as a writer, you'll write. If you think yourself as, an agent of change, you'll change things. So that's why I like the book. It's got a bunch of stuff in there, other stuff in there. I think I agree with. But anyway, that one's by James Clear, I think it is. It's called Atomic Habits. By the way, you can go on YouTube and listen to it, or you can get different snippets of it.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty solid. One of them said that the thing about these self-help books, make sure you write the snippets that work for you down someplace, because if you read 12 of them, you don't do anything, well, then you might as well not read 12 of them.
I had purchased it in January 3rd, 2021, and I vaguely remember the book, but I'll probably have to re-listen to it. I buy a lot of audiobooks because, again, it allows me the time to multitask a little bit. But sometimes, sometimes these books don't hit until you've experienced something in your life where it kind of clicks and you've re-listened to it more than once. So definitely appreciate the suggestion. I'll have to put it back in my list and go through it again.
Yeah, it's kind of worked for me there. I thought it was really interesting.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Tim.
Absolutely. Fantastic, Tim. And last question for you is, how can our listeners help? Who should reach out? Who do you want to connect with? Are you guys looking to hire? Are you looking to have interesting conversations? Very much your open platform for all of our listeners who have made it this far. If you have anything that they can help you with.
The ones that have hung on. Well, I'm around. You can try me. I had so many salespeople connect with me on LinkedIn. I've kind of shut my privacy down to the minimum. So tough to get a hold of me, but you can find me if you really need to. I'm out there. That's one way. I'm involved in a lot of the industries around some of the bigger ERP tools. The 3-letter bad word. If you know what I mean, that's you'll hear. That's kind of what I've been living with for the last number of years. I have a few others under the belt as well, but that's the bigger one. So
so much.
Hey, if you want to connect and reach out, if you have anything to share,
absolutely,
it's fine.
Tim, thank you so much for this awesome conversation. I am confident that Vlad and I could go pick your brain again all through the night and at some point into tomorrow morning. We would love to be able to bring you back on at some point in the future to continue this conversation. For this, thank you to Taylor for sponsoring the ERP theme. Again, go check out Elvis on episode 199. 199 if you want to go listen to a little bit more about that, about the selection process. We'll be back the next 2 Wednesdays with even more ERP conversations. If you guys have made it this far on LinkedIn, make sure you're following Talon. Make sure you're following Manufacturing Hub, Vlad, and myself. You guys probably can't follow Tim for the reasons that he just stated, but you might be able to go ahead and follow. If you know Tim, you can probably go ahead and follow along for him. If you made it this far on YouTube or any of the other broadcast listeners, please go ahead and hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any episodes. And if you guys have made it this far on podcast form, you're absolutely amazing. Please rate us 5 stars. Please follow along. Please go do all of those things. When I remember to remind people to do that, they do that, and then Vlad publishes the episodes, and then even more people listen to us. It's been an amazing process that we have been fairly successful with for at least 150 of our 200 episodes. Until next week, we'll see everyone soon.